Corporate frauds have been plaguing the business world for decades, where companies and executives use unethical methods to deceive investors, regulators, and the public. These tactics can range from manipulating financial statements and hiding debt to inflating profits and creating fictitious transactions. These deceptions often paint a picture of success and profitability, hiding the risks and losses behind closed doors. When corporate fraud is exposed, it reveals not just financial losses, but the true cost of unchecked ambition and greed. Recent corporate fraud in the US was the FTX scam, but one of the most infamous and largest corporate fraud examples is the Enron scandal. Once Wall Street's favorite and known as America's most innovative company by Fortune magazine every year from 1996 to 2001, valued at $60 billion. It was the seventh largest corporation in the United States, but it went bankrupt almost overnight, shocking the financial world. But how did a company so respected pull off one of the biggest frauds in history, and why did no one see it coming? Let's dive into the details of Enron's fraud. Enron was started by Kenneth Lay in 1985 by merging two smaller energy companies, Houston Natural Gas and InterNorth. Initially, Enron was simply a pipeline company that transported natural gas, but Kenneth Lay had larger ambitions. He aimed to expand Enron's operations beyond transporting gas to trading energy services. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the US government deregulated the energy prices and allowed demand in markets to set the price. This deregulation opened up a new market for energy trading and provided Enron an opportunity to become a key player in the buying and selling of energy. As the industry evolved, Enron began diversifying into new areas, including international energy markets and utilities, but it needed visionary guidance to take its trading ambitions to the next level. In 1990, Enron hired Jeffrey Skilling, a Harvard MBA graduate and former consultant at McKinsey & Company, to help develop its energy trading business. Skilling brought a sharp intellect and an aggressive approach to Enron. He quickly became known for his innovative ideas, especially around risk management and trading, which were areas Enron wanted to expand in. Skilling transformed Enron's business model from a traditional pipeline company into a high-stakes trading operation, where the focus was on trading energy contracts, derivatives, and financial instruments rather than just producing or transporting natural gas. One of the things Skilling has done was to introduce the mark-to-market accounting method. This method was controversial and helped Enron execute the biggest corporate fraud. Before mark-to-market, companies mostly used a method called historical cost accounting to record assets and revenue. This method was simple. With this method, a company records an asset or a contract based on the actual amount of money that has changed hands. Companies used to recognize revenue only when they actually received the cash. For example, imagine a company buys an office building for $500,000. Using historical cost accounting, they will keep this property listed on their financial statements at $500,000, regardless of whether the market value of the building goes up or down over time. Even if the building's market value doubles to $1 million, it will still be recorded at the original $500,000 purchase price. Only if the company decides to sell the building would they recognize the profit or loss based on the actual sale price. Historical cost accounting gave a more stable and conservative view of assets, which can be helpful in assessing a company's financial health without being influenced by fluctuating market prices. It prevented companies from overstating their financial position based on temporary market swings. This approach gave stakeholders confidence that the financial statements reflected real, verified transactions rather than speculative profits. Jeffrey Skilling applied to the SEC for a new accounting mark-to-market method, and surprisingly, their application was accepted by the SEC. Mark-to-market accounting was widely accepted in particular industries like financial services and commodity trading. The SEC and other regulators recognized that businesses in these sectors regularly dealt with assets whose values fluctuate based on market conditions, such as energy contracts, stocks, and bonds. The idea behind MTM was that it gave a more up-to-date reflection of the value of the assets in these markets. particularly for financial instruments that were actively traded. For example, banks, brokers, and insurance companies frequently use MTM to reflect the current value of their holdings, which makes sense when these assets are actively traded and their values change daily. The SEC and accounting standard boards allowed MTM for financial instruments because it seemed to provide a more accurate representation of current market values. Enron was operating in highly complex and evolving markets of energy trading, where future contracts and projected cash flows were standard practice. Energy trading contracts, like the ones Enron entered into, could span many years, and the value of those contracts could change based on energy prices, demand, and other market factors. At the time, the SEC's role was to ensure that companies were being transparent about their accounting practices. This meant that as long as Enron followed the rules, disclosed the use of MTM accounting, and provided financial statements that adhered to generally accepted accounting principles, then all was fine. But Enron misused mark-to-market accounting. Normally, mark-to-market accounting is used to adjust the value of assets based on their current market price. For example, if you buy a stock, you record its value based on the price it's trading for today. Enron, however, used MTM to record future profits, even though those profits had not yet materialized. They didn't just report the actual value of assets they owned or services they had already provided. They started recording projected profits from contracts that would only generate money in the future, sometimes many years down the road. Enron was involved in long-term energy contracts with customers that could span many years. Example, let's say Enron signs a deal to sell electricity over the next 10 years and it expects to bring in $500 million in profits. Using MTM, Enron could report $500 million in profit right away, even though they wouldn't actually receive the money until many years later. In reality, there was no guarantee that the deal would go as planned. Prices could drop, the deal could fall through, or the customer might default. But Enron recorded the profits as they thought they were guaranteed. Enron not only used MTM to report profits on good deals, but also used it to cover up bad deals. For instance, Enron might sign a bad deal, one that was clearly losing money or would never be profitable. Instead of admitting this loss, they would use MTM to forecast future profits that didn't exist. They would base these future profits on optimistic assumptions, like the price of energy going up or a new market opening, even though there was no way to know for sure if those predictions would ever come true. This allowed them to hide losses by reporting projected profits that didn't exist, which misled investors into thinking Enron was doing well when it was actually struggling. So all this long, Enron was reporting huge profits, but actually they were in loss and had no money coming in. Now, in such a situation, they cannot go to investors to ask for money, as investors would ask them, if your balance sheets look so profitable, then why do you need more money from the investors? To counter this, Jeffrey Skilling came up with a new idea. The idea was to create a special purpose entity. In simple terms, a special purpose entity, or SPE, is like a side business that a company sets up for specific purposes, often to handle particular assets, debts, or projects. The idea behind an SEP is that it operates separately from the main company, even though the main company still controls it. Companies use SPEs to keep risky assets or projects separate from the main business. For example, if they have a high-risk investment, they can put it in an SPE, so if it fails, it doesn't directly harm the company's main finances. Sometimes, companies use SPEs to keep certain debts or liabilities off their main balance sheet, which is where they report their financial health to investors. By moving debt to an SPE, the company can make its own financial situation look better because it doesn't have to list that debt as part of its own. It can also help companies save on taxes or make it easier to get funding. Because SPEs are technically separate entities, they might get tax benefits or be able to borrow money more easily than the main company. Enron took the concept of SPEs to an extreme. Here's what they did. Enron created many SPEs, which were technically independent companies on paper but were actually controlled by Enron. Here's how they inflated profits. Enron would raise the price of the asset before selling it. For instance, LJM partnerships and fake profits. Enron's chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, set up two SPEs, LJM1 and LJM2. These partnerships were supposedly independent, but they were actually controlled by Fastow, an Enron executive. Enron sold underperforming assets, like poorly performing power plants, to the LJM SPEs at inflated prices. For example, an asset worth $50 million might be sold to LJM for $80 million. By inflating the asset's price, Enron could immediately record a $30 million profit on its financial statements. To make the deal look appealing for the LJM partnerships, Enron guaranteed a return on the assets, promising to buy them back or pay extra if they lost value. This meant that if the assets declined in value, Enron would cover the losses. So, although the LJM partnerships technically owned the assets, the financial risk remained with Enron. Enron didn't show these buyback obligations on its balance sheet, so the debt associated with these guarantees was hidden. On paper, Enron appeared more profitable, but in reality, they were responsible for any future losses on these assets. In March 2001, Bethany McLean, a reporter at Fortune magazine, struggled to understand Enron's financial statements and business model. So she published an article titled, "Is Enron Overpriced?" She questioned how Enron was making its profits and why its high stock price was not matched by transparent financials. Once it came into the limelight, everyone started to question Enron's financials. When Kenneth Lay and Skilling resigned, it was clear that the company had dubious financials. After this, Enron's stock fell from a price of $90 to $1 within a month. Because of this sharp fall in the price, the investors lost around $74 billion. Enron had also hidden $32 billion in debt as liabilities of these SPEs. Enron was the guarantor of their loans as well. So the overall total loss caused by Enron was more than $100 billion. In the beginning of 2001, one of the short sellers named Jim Chanos started studying Enron and got suspicious of their financial health. So he started shorting Enron stock since the beginning of 2001.
Enron was definitely part of a moment, and a lot of people don't think of Enron as one of the tech bubble or .com type stories, but it really was.
And in September, when Enron stock went from $90 to $1, he made a huge profit. It was said that he made more than $1 million profit by shorting Enron stock. So Jim Chanos was the mini Michael Burry at the time. This is how the biggest scam in corporate America was executed. Another big fraud or crisis in the US was the 2008 housing crisis, and many people made huge profits during that crisis. Watch this video to know how they figured out the crisis before everyone else and made huge money.